Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Group. It's the Monday main event, 5 p.m. Mountain. We talk about all things creative real estate on this webinar. We like to bring in experts, insurance guys, mortgage guys, foreclosure guys, development guys, finance guys, anybody that we can think of who would have something to say about real estate in general and creative real estate in particular. So we like to do that. We like to have folks on who have done deals. And we're gonna be doing that today. We're gonna be talking about. Thank you, Donna.
Didn't realize my head was showing.
My producer in the kitchen with my halo kitchen light. I love sitting under the halo by the microwave. It's like, it's great. Today we're going to talk to a chap named Doug Robertson, and Andrea Workington is also going to be on, longtime Focus team leader, has done lots of agreements for sale. And we're aiming at September 24th. I mean, in May of this year, May 7th and 8th in Calgary, we did our first live event in 3 long COVID years. We did our rapid cash event, a two-day event covering 5 creative real estate strategies. But coming up on September 24th is what we call AFS Intensive. AFS standing for Agreements for Sale. Intensive because it's a full day. And normally when we talk about agreements for sale in any other program, it's usually about half a day or so. So a full day really gives us the opportunity to dig into the examples, the exercises, the discussions, the back and forth. It's what folks say really sends them off nicely to try to implement the agreement for sale strategy. So that's what's coming up on September 24th. Donna will tell you all about it in the chat. Anybody who's taken it can weigh in and say what they thought about it. I think it's really an amazing course. I hate rushing through things. And when we do AFS for a whole day, it gives us a chance to really tear it apart and put it back together and get into the subtleties and the nuances and the whys and the wherefores, which you just can't do when you don't have as much time, or you can't do as well anyway. So that's why I like AFS Intensive. And anybody who's interested in agreements for sale should definitely sign up and show up with us and really enjoy September 24th. So that's coming up. We're going to bring in our guests for today now. We have Andrea Workington, and hopefully Doug Robertson is going to show up fairly soon here. Andrea, there you are. What a big smile.
I always have a big smile for you, Barry.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, you do. And I appreciate that. Or as they say on Letterkenny, I appreciates that in the plural. If you ever watch Letterkenny, great show. So today, Andrea, we're going to talk about agreements for sale from the seller side. Normally, we're always talking about it, the low equity, no equity deal where you can take over somebody's mortgage and expenses and really not have to put up too much money. And there are lots of those out there. And we see probably more of those than we see seller deals. But we do see seller deals, do we not?
We do. Absolutely.
Yes.
Including myself. I've sold by agreement for sale to a fellow investor a couple of times.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about that. So for folks, I'm probably thinking there's not too many people watching today who haven't seen us talk about agreements for sale, at least a little bit. But very, very briefly, an agreement for sale is seller financing. That's what it is. The seller is your bank, whether he's got a clear title property or whether he's got a little mortgage or whether he's got a big mortgage that's almost, what the property is worth. In all of these cases, when you buy from a seller, it's seller financing. It's seller financing, the terms of which you have to figure out depending on the circumstances. So Andrea, now let's talk about why it was more advantageous. What was the win-win in you selling by way of agreement for sale instead of saying to your buyer, well, go get your own new mortgage, get a new mortgage you can buy. If not, well, I'll move on to somebody else. Why did you implement the AFS strategy as a seller?
Well, at the time, the market was a little slower, and I had a friend in Red Deer who specialized in putting in basement suites. And so he there's a couple of properties of mine that he really wanted to put in basement suites because their strategy was to basically have all of their portfolios to be suited houses for the better cash flow. And I had originally purchased that property by way of agreement for sale. And so for me to then turn around and do the same thing with him was very easy. And I still made some good money because I made money when I bought by agreement for sale. And then
Yes.
later on I made money when I sold by
So,
way of agreement for sale. So
yeah.
I saved myself realtor fees because back then I wasn't a realtor anyhow. So I was
Yeah.
just a regular person. And then I was able to help my friend. And so he took over the payments. I didn't charge him any extra interest or anything like that. He just took over the mortgage, taxes, and insurance and all the maintenance on the property.
Yeah.
And it was like less than a year, and he was able to get his own mortgage, and it was fantastic. It
Oh
was
my.
a great opportunity for the both of us.
Okay. So that was, there's Doug Robertson signing in. We'll just finish our conversation with Andrea here, and then we'll introduce Doug. Um, so it was useful for your friend who he wanted to do another house where he could put a basement suite in because that was his strategy.
Yes.
So I guess the benefit for him is he gets to buy from you by way of agreement for sale, and he doesn't have to come up with all the other cash that he would normally have to come up with. And he can devote his time and his energy and his money to putting in and paying for the basement suite.
Exactly. Now, I did have to sign off on all the permits for the city when
Mm-hmm.
he went through the process, and I was happy to do so. And of course, he had to follow all of the rules that they set out for extra parking and things like that.
Sure.
But yeah, it meant that instead of using money for a down payment to purchase, he was able to use the money for the renovation. And then when he refinanced from the agreement for sale to his own mortgage, he had improved the value enough so he only had 5 or 10% left in the deal.
Oh, nice.
So it was a great return on investment for him as well.
That was good. So a couple of things in there that people should know about. So you said that you had to sign off on all the permits, and the reason
Mhm.
is that you were still the owner of the property, and so the city wanted you to sign off. I'm guessing that's why.
Yes.
Now, in your case, this was your friend, and this was something he had done before, at least once, twice, three times, maybe more.
Yes,
So,
exactly. He was well experienced at it,
okay.
and he didn't need any guidance from me on how to do the
No.
basement suite properly.
So the thing for people to understand is that if this wasn't your friend and it just happened to be somebody you didn't know, especially somebody who was doing their first basement suite, you didn't know them, they don't have any experience. How would you have handled that? I mean, assuming everything else about them seemed fine, but they didn't
Mhm.
have that experience, would you have been concerned? And if you were, what would you do to make sure that they were following all the rules and that they did a good job and they didn't ruin your house?
Yes, great question. So I think I would have been extremely hesitant to do it,
Yeah.
partly because if they didn't do it properly and then ended up walking away, now I've got a property that's half torn apart.
Yeah.
So, you know, uh, part of the reason why I was willing to do it was because of the experience level
Yes.
of that investor. So I
Mhm.
think, it's different if somebody was just going to do a lipstick reno of paint
Yeah.
and flooring, completely different.
Yeah.
But for somebody to do this level, spend $80,000 to do a proper basement suite,
Yeah.
it's super important that these people have some sort of track record.
That's a different story. So if anybody listening was planning to do that themselves, you could maybe get around this problem if you are an experienced person and you know what needs to be done. You can see what the person is planning to do in terms of trades? Do they think they're going to go to YouTube and do it all on their own because it's all on YouTube? There's a lot there. You could do it, or are they going to, be their own general contractor and hire painters and plumbers and electricians and carpenters and all of the people? So you could check on that. You could tell them that you might consider selling to them by way of agreement for sale, where they were going to put in the secondary suite, but that you were going to require them to pay for your inspector of choice, who would watch over what they were doing on a very regular basis and have kind of control of the project.
Exactly. And I think if, somebody was hiring somebody with a lot of experience in doing secondary suites as their general contractor, I'd probably be okay with that for sure. Yeah.
So that is, if you're going to do that, you have to be sure that your house isn't going to be ruined, and there are lots of things you can do to try and make sure.
Yes.
And now you did say one other thing before we get over to Doug. You did say that when you sold, you didn't add any extra interest on. And so explain to people what that meant in terms of the interest that your friend did have to pay you, and what you could have considered but didn't in this circumstance, because that's, I think, an important thing for people to hear about selling by way of an agreement for sale is the interest rate spread, and should you or shouldn't you, and what does it mean?
Yes. So basically, I did the deal that I always like to receive on the buying end, which is I pay what they pay. And so he paid what I paid. So, for example, if the interest rate was 3% on the mortgage, that's what the gentleman was paying. I could have said, you're going to pay 4 or 5% for the privilege. And, especially because my unpaid seller's equity, I did have like a $10,000 deposit, but my unpaid seller's equity, I was not charging any interest on that either.
Right.
Now, it was a shorter term. So, somebody I knew. And so I was happy to do it.
So that is always part of what happens when you sell by way of agreement for sale is you're the bank. What interest are you charging? And Andrea was just charging what she was paid. Well, she was paying a 3% number, so she charged her friend a 3% number, but could have said, I'll charge you 5%, because that would have given her a 2% spread on whatever the number was that Andrea was being the bank for. And that can be a decent chunk of money. Especially it can be a decent chunk of money when the seller has a clear title property. And that's one of the, that I think that's one of the circumstances, Andrea, that we talked about where sellers might consider an agreement for sale if they don't have another good use for their money and they're confident in the buyer and they don't mind earning, we used to say 4 or 5%, but with rates going up, it could be 6 or 7 or 8%.
Exactly.
Once these rates settle in. So it can be a moneymaker for a seller and a reason that a seller would sell by way of agreement for sale. So lots to talk about there. Well, on that note, let's bring in Doug Robertson, who is talking to us today from, you're a traveling kind of guy, Doug. Where are you today?
Digby, Nova Scotia.
Digby, Nova Scotia.
Yeah, back home in Digby. So my apologies for being late.
Well, you know what? Andrea filled up that gap wonderfully, so no trouble at all.
Andrea is a wonderful woman.
Yeah, I've always said that.
Yes.
I think that's the general consensus, don't you think?
So,
yeah, I think
that's very kind of you, Doug.
Let's done that.
Well deserved. Yeah.
So, Doug, before we dive into you and your experience being a seller by way of agreement for sale, you said, I'm back home in Digby. Of course, when I was meeting you and dealing with you, you were here in Edmonton, Alberta,
yes.
And we're here for a long time. So tell us about getting from Digby to Alberta, what you did in Alberta, and what took you home to Digby. So just people can have some flavor of who you are.
To give you a quick little story is the fact that I left Nova Scotia. I was born and raised in Nova Scotia. Left when I was 19, went to Alberta on 2 days' notice. My buddy phoned me on a Friday night and said, how would I like to go to Calgary I said, okay. So we left on Monday and went to Alberta. Actually, I spent 50 years in Alberta doing construction, virtually all phases of construction from, well, pretty much everything. Renovations, full house builds, custom homes, high-rise condos, the whole works. Lived from Calgary. Then we went way up north to Barhead, Alberta, which we thought was a long ways north then, until I got a job in high level. That's when I knew it was way up north. So we lived in high level for 5 years, ended up settling back in by Stony Plain, Alberta, and worked for a few big construction companies around Edmonton and area. And then, life takes its turns. My wife ended up with dementia for a number of years. Family and I finally got her into an assisted living facility, which, if anybody is thinking about that for someone, it's the best thing that ever happened. She's happy, she's contented. So I then, as life turns around, I reconnected with a girl, I should say a lady, I dated in 1969, and we reconnected. I came down here for a couple of weeks. She went out to Alberta for a month, and then we drove back to Nova Scotia. And she's from Digby, so that's where I'm at.
In Digby. In Digby. You know what? You sound like just the kind of a guy Andrea would want to have if her AFS buyer knew nothing about putting in a secondary suite and she wanted a good set of eyes. Yeah. That would have been your guy.
Yeah, I've done a few of those, and like I said, we've done virtually every type of construction there is. So,
all right.
Finished up the last 12 years out in Alberta doing custom cabinets and woodworking and that kind of stuff. So.
And that was kind of your last thing that you did, was doing the custom work, I think.
Yes, yeah. And that was up to building $1 million barn for a lady and her 3 horses.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a big fancy house that she kept her horses in. It had a stone fireplace in it, had a washroom, it had a shower stall for the horses, it had a laundry room, a tack room, medical room, full kitchen, had a loft up above it with a bed. It was a big fancy house.
I wonder what the actual house looked like if she has $1 million barn / house.
It was pretty nice too. Yeah,
I bet. So. Well, that kind of leads into our story. So as you're moving along in life, and as life takes its turns, you have a house in Stony Plain. You're on an acreage, I believe. Tell us about the home that you were in before you went back to Digby, and really the home that's the subject of our example.
We bought it. It's about almost a 3,000 square foot log home, 2-story log home that we bought just outside of Stony Plain. It's on about 2 acres of land and a really nice little subdivision. It had a big double-car garage in it that the owners lived in while they were building the house. And then I added onto it a 30 by 40 foot woodworking shop.
Right.
So I added that onto it. So when did I decide to sell? I decided to sell, I guess, after we got my wife in the assisted living facility, and certainly didn't need that big of a house. So decided to downsize a little bit. So we put it up for sale. So we put up for sale for $650,000, and a fellow come along, Nigel McLean. I don't know, Andy, if you know Nigel or not.
Nigel's a realtor here in Edmonton.
Yeah, he brought me a rent-to-own offer from a gentleman who actually was living in his trailer just a mile away at the lake. So he came to me with this rent-to-own agreement, and in talking with the gentleman, he seemed to be fairly experienced with different creative deals in real estate. So anyway, we Barry put together the rent-to-own agreement. We had a agreement of purchase and sale drawn up to be used in the future rather than most. We had the option to purchase as well too, but we did a full scale agreement of purchase and sale, and the only thing we needed to do was to insert a date on it when we finalized the final date on it. So that and it wasn't too complicated. All we had was a rent to own, and in hindsight now, I'm not even sure why. Now, I guess this come along with the agreement for sale, but I sold him my all my woodworking equipment as well too. So that was another side deal with it, and there was that. That's pretty much for the option for the rent to own deal, and that was in 2020.
So we started out with a rent to own. So he's your tenant. He has
Yeah.
an option to buy. We
Yeah.
put together the option agreement and the lease agreement, and he started out like that. And I can't remember how long that was for. Was it going to be a 2-year rent to own?
We didn't have a fixed date on it.
Yeah. So
Uh,
kind of open option.
Yeah, because he was just starting his new business up.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't actually positive how his new business was going.
Yeah.
So, so I mean, we were just basically going to let the rent to own run until such time that he was ready to do it. Now he had a good deposit, put a $50,000 deposit down.
Yep.
It was about 7%, a little over 7%.
It's pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah. So he did that. We didn't do a monthly option payment for him because he did do the full $50,000 up front. So we just set up with the straight rent for it. Again, with obviously where he does all the maintenance on it, all the repairs, responsible for all the typical things that rent to own would include.
Yeah. And then at a point in time, we converted that rent to own into an agreement for sale. And I think the reason was that he really wanted to be an owner, because in the other way, he's a tenant with a chance to buy, but he really wanted to be an owner. Mm-hmm. And because he was starting his new business, and it was quite the new business he was starting.
Yes.
It's not just a simple little business. It was quite a complicated, worldwide, heavy capital intensive business. But he was doing well with that, but he wanted to be an owner. And so we converted it into an agreement for sale, because I think his ability to get a mortgage was limited, because he was pouring all his money and his credit into building his business, if I recall.
Yes, yeah. Pretty much the way it was. He started up the new business, and it was very, very capital heavy. He had some investors with him, and unfortunately that didn't work out too well for him. But so he at times he was rather strapped. But I mean, you're talking about millions of dollars he was going through in this new business.
Yeah, this was not small, folks. This was a worldwide business. Yeah. Heavy equipment, huge capital outlays, so much money traveling and marketing, and so he just couldn't go to the bank and get a mortgage. So that's why you converted the rent to own into an agreement for sale. Yeah. And in doing that conversion, one of the interesting things that people would want to hear about, I think, is that when we talk about agreements for sale and where the seller is being your bank, the loan part of it is usually pretty straightforward. So let's go back to Andrea and Andrea can give us the terms of her agreement for sale with her friend who was going to put in the basement suite. Mm-hmm. So just give us some rough numbers, Andrea, a price and how much he gave you for deposit and what he owed you.
So the purchase price was roughly $320,000, mm-hmm. and he gave me a $10,000 deposit, and it was a 1-year contract, but we anticipated he would, finish sooner than that. But, just on the outside to make him feel comfortable, we did a 1-year contract.
Okay.
And so he paid what I paid, and we did all the paperwork that we would normally do and sent it to the lawyer's office and had everything registered properly. Mm-hmm. And when he finished the basement suite, then he got the property appraised and got a new first mortgage and cashed me out.
So that is a really nice, clean, straightforward seller agreement for sale. 320,000, did you say?
Yes.
320.
Yes. It was
So
a number
sell,
of years ago.
right. So sell price is 320. Yeah, it wouldn't be like that now. Sale price is 320. He gives you 10,000 as a deposit.
Mhm.
That means you're his bank for $310,000.
Yes.
Right? 320 minus the deposit equals 310,000. So that is the most wonderful, simple AFS sale. It's only got two numbers: a deposit for 10,000. Andrew is the bank for 310,000. Total price 320,000. Right?
Yes.
Nice
Yes.
and simple.
Mhm.
Doug, yours was not quite as simple as that.
A little bit. No,
A little bit. All right.
always get rather complicated because when we flipped it over the agreement for sale, and looking back in hindsight now, I'm not sure why we did. It was $650,000. He had given me $50,000 down to begin with. When we did the just over about 15 months ago now, 16 months ago now, we did the agreement for sale. And again, because of the components to it, we had a mortgage with Scotiabank, we had a line of credit with Scotiabank, and had a TD HELOC. So there was the three components. Then I had my tool contract with them, which was another financing deal. And I'm not sure why we did $100,000 loan to him for like carry. I mean, thinking back in hindsight now, I'm not sure why we said it was fine with me. I was collecting interest on it for the last 16 months, but
Yes.
I'm thinking back now, I don't know why we did that.
Well, the reason that we did that is because, if you start out at your price of $650,000. So folks, let's run through what Doug did here and we'll compare it to what Andrea did. So Andrea's got a $10,000 deposit, $310,000 she's the AFS bank for, total 320. Doug starts out at $650,000. So the first number in Doug's set of numbers is the $50,000 deposit. So that's number one, $50,000 deposit. The second number is your regular Scotiabank mortgage,
Yes, yeah,
which was a number.
yeah,
The third one is your Scotiabank line of credit.
yeah.
So that was the third number.
Third one, yeah.
The fourth thing was the tools. So you and your buyer valued the tools at a certain amount of money, and that tool number got added into the $650,000.
He was paying me a monthly payment on the tools.
Monthly payment on the tools.
He was paying me the monthly payment on the $100,000 that I was carrying for him.
And so then there was $100,000 that he's making you a monthly payment on at a decent interest rate. What was that interest rate again?
9%.
9%. 9%. So if you're thinking of selling, we said before when we were talking to Andrea that she could have said, okay, I'm paying 3% to my bank, but I want you to pay me 5% or 6% or 7%. And that's just a negotiated number. And you do it or don't do it for whatever reasons show up in your deal. In Doug's case, there was a $100,000 number that the buyer was happy to pay him 9% on.
Yeah.
9% monthly payments.
Yeah, that was 16 months ago.
So
now it's not so great now, but then it's okay.
And it was good.
And
then
and this gentleman has become good friends with us too. So
sure,
it's not like he's just a complete stranger. We became good friends, and we're still negotiating on different deals now too. So,
and so those were five numbers that we put in: deposit, Scotiabank regular mortgage, Scotiabank line of credit, tools, $100,000, and then if we subtracted all of those from the $650,000, he still owed you about $100,000, and he agreed to pay you three lump sum payments over time, which he has paid. So for Doug's deal, he has six different components into his agreement for sale. So I think the point of going over this in such detail is that the agreement for sale structure is a very flexible structure. It's very flexible for buyers and sellers. I mean, Doug and his buyer had to sit and take that $650,000 sale price and break it down into its component parts and come up with something that was a win-win for both Doug and the buyer, remembering that they each had quite different plans, quite different needs, and quite different abilities to deal with the $650,000, especially since the buyer was spending every spare second and every penny on his extremely capital intensive business that he was building. So I guess my point in all of that is to really show that the AFS structure, when you're the bank, you can be as creative as the situation will allow you to be, and as creative as you're comfortable being, and as creative as as you're allowed to be, considering how much diligence you do on your buyer. So let's talk about that part of it. Yeah. Andrea's diligence was, what was your diligence, Andrea, for your example that you told us about, why you thought your buyer was a good bet?
Yes. So him and his wife have been investing in Red Deer for probably almost a similar amount of time as myself. Nice young family, well established in the community. And he had some construction background, and I had seen some of the basement suites that he had done. So there was certainly a high level of trust as investors, and also in his abilities. So I think those were kind of the main things for me. Mm-hmm. And I like when I can help a newer investor, have a hand up. So,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So trust is something that we talk about a lot in any of our programs that we teach. We certainly talk about it a lot in AFS, that establishing trust in any kind of creative real estate relationship is important on both sides. And so you establish trust just by virtue of knowing this young investor, seeing properties that they've done, hearing about what their business plan was, and knowing that they'd brought that similar home situations to successful conclusions by installing lovely basement suites. So it wasn't very much of a leap for you to say, okay, I think you can do it again.
No. 100%. And they have continued to build their portfolio that way. So they still own that property, and it's probably been about, I'm going to say, 5 or 6 years, and it's done really well for them. And so that makes me really happy.
Yes. Yeah, it is nice to be able to help people and to give them a hand up, and to you do well by doing good. It's like you did well coming and going on that one. He did well because he got a chance to do another property and not have to go through the machinations that you have to go through with regular lenders to get things done. So that's a thread that runs throughout how we think creative real estate should run generally, and AFS certainly. You help people out, you solve problems, and it turns into a win-win. And it's a great story to tell. You can tell that story wherever you are in a lot of circumstances, and it's always a good story for sure. So now, Doug, little different for you. You didn't know this buyer from anywhere. He was kind of your neighbor because he lived near the lake, which is close to you. Yeah. But you didn't know him until Nigel introduced you. So how did you establish confidence that for this kind of bigger financial number, where as much as he gave you 50,000, he still owed you 600?
So owed me 600, yeah, and it was maybe a bit of a gut feeling. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time with Mike talking about where he'd been, where he wants to get to. He did provide me with his bank statements, his business bank statements that showed a substantial amount of money in his business account. So he did that. And again, like Andrea, he needed a place to live, and we had a second place that we could have gone to too. I had the second acreage that at that time was through circumstances was empty. So sure. I went, so I could go to my second acreage and help him and his family. He had a young family, and you know, I think it was as much of a gut feeling that he could have been a con man, but you know,
Yeah, could have been.
to get them in there is hard to get them out. But I think overall, I think it's turned out okay. But
Well, yes. I mean,
yeah,
it did do okay. I mean, you did establish trust by getting to know him and getting some information. But then, I mean, there's many a business deal that goes ahead based on not too much official diligence. It's based on getting to know people. It ends up being based on trust. It ends up on gut feeling and your assessment that you make. And I'm sure you had to do that a lot over your lengthy career in Alberta in construction. I'm sure there was lots of times when you had to, when you didn't have solid paperwork in front of you, you didn't have a bunch of research done, but you had to kind of figure it out and go with your gut. Did you run into that in your career?
yes, I mean, in all the careers, I mean, I was employed a lot of the time, but I have had my own business since 1985, and over a period of times I was self-employed, and the majority of the time I wouldn't say never, but very very seldom would I take a deposit on a job.
Oh.
I would do the job, and as the job progressed, I would take payment for the job as it progressed. Very firstly, I probably count on one hand the number of times I would actually take a deposit before the job begun, you know, unless it was to pay for material that I had dropped on site.
Yeah.
But and I could probably count on one hand the number of times I got ripped off, and the biggest one was a church, you know.
Oh my.
Yes, yeah.
All right, all you church-going folks, we're not casting aspersions on you.
No, just happened to be a church that
happened to be a church in that particular case.
yeah, and I wouldn't blame the church. I would blame the project manager that the church had looking after.
Okay, so
Anyway,
overall, you made assessments based on your view of it and trust, and you haven't been too badly burned, and so I guess that probably went into this situation as well.
I mean, I've gone through life with a philosophy of trust, and unless somebody burns me, I'll trust them.
Yeah,
I don't care if they're a homeless person on the street or a very wealthy person. I'll trust them until they burn me. And I mean, I'm not saying that this whole 2 years hasn't been, you know, smooth running. There's been times when I've been wondering, as you know yourself, there's times we've had issues, more communication issues than anything else. The communication
important
being interrupted by times, and so I think that is an important aspect of this too. Is make sure that you've got good lines of communication, and everybody knows what everybody else knows, what is expected of everybody else.
Yeah, yeah. Make it all clear. It has to be. I mean, it's certainly that's why I have contracts, and everything has to be written down. And you have to, before you get to the written word in the contract, you have to have lots of discussions about what we're both talking about, so that the written word, when it finally gets on paper, does truly reflect what people are thinking. You got to be thinking about it the same way before you stick it down on paper. It doesn't work. Yeah. All right. Well, having said that, let me throw something else into the conversation. So Donna and I have a townhouse that we owned for 25 years. The mortgage is now paid off. We have a tenant who's moved out, and so we're going to sell this townhouse unit because I have turned 45 now, and it's time for me to look to retirement. And so we're pruning a few properties, and so we're considering, it's clear title. We're considering. Let me back up a step. As we talk to realtors that we know, and we say, we're thinking of selling this townhouse. Let's talk about it. Here's what we're hearing that the rising interest rate environment is impacting the number of buyers. People can only buy, they either can't buy at all because the cost, the interest rate cost is so high that they can't make the payments, or they can buy only less house. And so what that's done to some extent is there are fewer buyers in the market, and those fewer buyers can qualify for less home. So Andrea is now a realtor. She wasn't back then when she was doing this house we were talking about previously, but she is a realtor now. And Andrea has a wealth of experience as an investor to put together with her realtor experience, her property manager experience, her mutual fund trust experience, her developer experience, her international business experience. Am I missing any experiences, Andrea? Have I caught most of them there?
Dancing.
I think I caught most of them. But as on the realtor side of things, what are you hearing about buyers and interest rates and their ability to qualify that might fit into Donna and I saying, maybe for some of these buyers, we should consider an agreement for sale. Tell us what's going on in today's marketplace.
I think that part of it depends on the price point that you're at and probably your neighborhood. So we are still seeing fairly steady sales at that first-time home buyer and a step above. So basically in Red Deer, anything under $450,000 that's in really good shape is selling still fairly well. So you'll have some houses that sell in 4 days, and get an offer, and others that will take 2 months if they're maybe not as pretty or a little rougher around the edges. But we are still getting, I would say, a steady amount of sales. Now, we're not having like crazy bidding wars or anything like that in Red Deer. However, what we are having is people come from Ontario because they cannot afford to buy a house in Ontario, but they can in Alberta. And if they can get a job transfer, or if their employer will allow them to work from home, they're coming here to find somewhere to live that's affordable. So even despite interest rate changes, there are certain marketplaces that continue to do very solidly well. So I would say to you, Barry, depending on what price range your townhouse is at, it may still be very attractive despite the interest rate changes.
Sure. So it may turn out that we don't have to consider an agreement for sale because it'll be a bit, we're doing a bit of a reno to it. So it'll look really nice. It's in a lovely neighborhood, schools close, shopping close. It's a good neighborhood. So I'm expecting that it will look wonderful. It'll be a great price point. And so Donna, we're going to get all our money, Andrea says. We don't have to do an agreement for sale.
I think so. Quite honestly, my one client that's coming out from Ontario this coming weekend, we are looking at houses also in Edmonton, not townhouses, sorry, Barry,
No,
but we are looking at houses. And, a $450,000 price point is still, you get a lot of house for that here in Red Deer, maybe not so much in Edmonton, but, you can get something pretty decent, especially considering what they're paying for rent in the GTA. They're actually saving money by buying a house.
Yes. If they, for what they'll get for $450 here, they wouldn't, it would be $1 million plus in the GTA.
Absolutely.
Sure. So that's one of the great attractive features. I do see tons and tons of people in my practice coming from both British Columbia and from Ontario. And that's what they say. This is, my national company was happy to move me out here. I can work from home. It doesn't matter. I'm going to sell my Toronto house, pay cash for this house, buy a couple of investment properties, and relax about housing. That's what they say.
Exactly.
So,
now, it's funny because down here in Nova Scotia, we've seen a lot of people moving to Nova Scotia from Ontario. And this, like 2 years ago, when the big move started, everybody, moving to the country and the rural settings from the big cities, they came to Nova Scotia. And at the time I was thinking, and I've told people, I say, you know what, you'll probably see in a couple of years' time, some of these people moving back to Ontario because they want to be satisfied with life here in Nova Scotia. And we're seeing that. We're seeing people moving back to Ontario from Nova Scotia to be closer to family, just because they just want to go back to Toronto or wherever they came from. So it's putting a bit of I mean, it's not like it's a flood of people, but we hear more and more about people moving back to Ontario, you know, and found one couple moving from Ecuador back to Ontario to be closer to the family. But
Oh my.
yeah, they got a beautiful place down in Ecuador.
Well,
Yeah.
I think, I think that is something that we do talk about, and it's important to say, is that when you see any kind of media headline that says, prices are up 8.9%, prices are down 6.9%, the average price is, I mean, that is a number that is useless for us as investors because it's all local. I
Yeah.
mean, what's going on in Red Deer for Andrea is different than what's going on in the surrounding towns that she knows so well. What's going on for Doug in Digby?
Yeah.
Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Doug in Digby.
Yeah.
Is different than what's happening for Barry and Donna in Edmonton with their townhouse that they're selling. So, folks, as you're listening, local knowledge is really important. So, you definitely, if you're in the Red Deer area, you got to be talking to Andrea about anything to do with Red Deer. And how many clicks out, Andrea? 100 clicks in either direction, or is that a little too far?
Yeah, I basically do within 45 minutes to an hour of Red Deer. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be 100 clicks.
Mm-hmm.
Just remember that. Your Central Alberta Realtor, Andrea Workington. Yay! Let's hear it for her. All right. Well, I'm going back to the townhouse because if we, Donna and my townhouse, see, if we decided to do something by way of agreement for sale, it would be a sale to somebody that we don't know about. So I'm being the bank. Donna and I are being the bank for this potential purchaser. And likely, because I would have it listed, I'm not going to get to know that person. And so if you're going to sell by way of agreement for sale and you don't have Andrea's experience with her buyer or Doug's trust that he built up over time with his buyer, then what are you going to do? Andrea, what would I do you think, to accomplish some diligence? I mean, if any buyer goes to the bank is going to do whatever banks do for diligence on any new borrower. What could I do as an AFS seller to have some confidence that this buyer is going to pay Donna and I over time? What would I do?
Well, I think there's a couple things. First, you would want to have them kind of pre-qualified, similar to what you do with a rent to own. So you would send them to your local mortgage broker and make sure they can actually qualify for your price point of home based on their income, on their family income.
Right.
And that if they do have some debt scenario, like if their total debt service ratio is over 40, then, do they need to maybe trade in the brand new car for an old junker or something to reduce those monthly payments?
Yeah.
So I kind of look at it as similar to when you qualify a rent to own client. And, I can't prevent people from losing their job or moving cross country or anything like that.
No.
But, basically you become a first mortgage holder. And so title is changing hands and you have less control on the seller financing side when you are not doing an agreement for sale, but just a traditional, you're the bank.
Sure.
You and Donna are first mortgage holders. So then you would have to foreclose if they stopped making payments.
Sure.
In which case it might be better to do a rent to own if you felt like they were not as strong of a candidate.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So I didn't think of that, but of course we could consider doing a rent to own or selling to them with a VTB or selling to them by way of agreement for sale. But I think the nugget in what you just said is that not knowing anything about these people and trying to decide as a bank whether they're a good credit risk, I would send them off to a mortgage broker, just like they would be doing if they were trying to get a traditional mortgage. They would go to a mortgage broker and say, listen, we want to buy a house. We got to get a mortgage. And the mortgage broker would then do what mortgage brokers do, which is analyze their credit and know what he would have to provide to any bank to get the bank to approve these people. So it would kind of be the same thing. I'd get help from a third-party credit expert like a mortgage broker. So that's That
Now,
is something.
one other thought. Since
Yeah.
you own Free and Clear, if you are interested in dealing with a cultural group that does not believe in interest payments,
Right.
you could offer that as well as monthly installments on them actually paying down the property.
Right.
And so that could be another option.
Yes. Didn't think of that. Of course, so that is that situation, cultural groups that, they're not allowed to pay interest. So that can be a real a real godsend for them, literally. If you're prepared to say, listen, we're not going to charge you interest. We're going to take the price. We're going to figure out what the number is. We're going to divide it by however many payments you want to make, and that's what you're going to pay. And there's no interest, and that would fit for them.
Yeah.
And there's more of that coming on. So thanks for reminding me of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
You're welcome.
That's good.
Mhm.
All right. So I wanted to hear about Andrea's situation. We've gone over Doug's 6-part agreement for sale in detail. My goodness. Normally I get those on one page in my agreement for sale document. It took 2 full pages to explain exactly what was going on with Doug.
Simple.
Simple. Well, it actually, though, when you think about it, it's just taking the $650,000 and dividing it into the component parts that work for you and your buyer. That's all it was, and making them all fit together.
And Andrea could probably answer this better than both of us. Could we have set that up with a $600,000 seller for financing right from the get-go? If we gave
Sure.
them a $1,000 down payment and just one lump $600,000 seller financing at 4.5% interest,
Well, yeah, you could have, because $50,000 down, 600,000 at whatever the number was,
Yeah.
and then you get the interest that comes from, you get the payment that comes from that mortgage or that agreement for sale. 600,000 at 5% generates a payment. It could be an amortized payment, or it could be an interest-only payment, and then you take that and you pay your Bank of Nova Scotia regular mortgage, your Bank of Nova Scotia line of credit, your TD line of credit, and then whatever's left over out of the $600,000 payment goes in your pocket.
Yeah, and
Could have done that, and at the end of the time when he pays you off, he gets title to the house and title to the tools.
Title to the tools, yeah.
And don't forget those tools. That's important. So yeah, you could have done that. Would have been a lot easier to write up. It might have generated more cash flow for you. But
well, really would have done more cash flow, but I mean, it at the time it seemed to be okay.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah, and at the time he wasn't able to qualify for any kind of regular financing. I think he's being very careful about how much money he put in, even though he was making big lump sum payments, and even though he did do the $50,000, it would have been a lot simpler to do 600,000 at 5%.
I would have been a little simpler, yeah.
A lot simpler.
One straightforward deal. So,
all right, I'm going to go to my producer Donna, the prima donna, Madonna. I'm going to band practice tonight, so I'm just
getting warmed up.
getting warmed up a little bit.
Yeah.
Any questions, Donna, that we can be answering? Or
yeah, they're kind of random, but so there was one that came
let's hear
a while
what a
ago.
question.
Um,
Did the buyers get inspections prior to the AFS starting? Andrea, did your buyer get an inspection? No.
No,
No.
he did not. Simply because he'd had enough experience and knew what he was doing. So
Right. And trusted you to not hide something from him.
exactly. Yeah.
So trust runs both ways here.
Mhm.
Doug, what about your guy? Did he get an inspection?
No, we didn't do an inspection either. Again, we did a full walkthrough and walk through the whole house and all the mechanical systems, but not an official inspection. No.
Now, when we are talking about agreements for sale generally, and we're almost always talking about folks being buyers rather than sellers, we do say that if you're not in the position of Andrea's buyer, who had experience, and I think Doug's guy had some experience, if you as a buyer don't have that, get a home inspection, get a house inspection. If you're a seller maybe you want to get one to say that I've had it inspected and here it is, and it's in great shape. Andrea, what do you think about that? Would you ever tell your sellers to get and offer an inspection, or do you say it's better for the buyer to get their own because then they trust that and it's not something maybe the
Well,
sellers?
it kind of depends. I think it's important that people have an understanding of where their property is at on that. And it also allows a seller an opportunity to fix some of these things.
Sure.
So that when the buyer does do their home inspection, there's less items to negotiate over. So certainly with rent-to-own clients, I highly, highly, highly recommend that they do a home inspection. And because most of these properties that I'm offering, I've never personally lived in myself. I don't know the ins and outs of it. So I want them to do their due diligence as well before committing to purchase.
Yeah. No, that's ultra important. So Brandy, I think the general coaching would be, if you're buying by way of AFS, you should, unless you're an expert and you're not worried, you should get your own inspection. And then if you're on the selling side, you can consider getting one to avoid surprises when the buyer's inspection comes along and says, well, the furnace and the hot water tank are on their last legs. If they last another 6 months, I'll be surprised. And whoever did that last reshingling job didn't know their butt from page one. If you don't know about those things yourselves, you shouldn't get surprises. So that's our coaching on that one. Donna, is there another question?
Yeah, these are just kind of random ones before we close.
Okay. Danny says, does anyone know what sites I can use to find Alberta tax assessment without being the homeowner? Well, I don't, Danny, I don't think it's Alberta tax assessments, because I think tax assessment is done by the municipality, by the city or the town. So I don't think there's an Alberta place to look.
But he's out of province.
Oh, okay. All right.
So here's an example, Danny. Like for the city of Red Deer, they have kind of an interactive map, and one of those map overlays is a tax assessed value. So if you have either the street address or the legal description, you can hover your mouse over that lot and it'll give you the approximate city assessed value. But that's just one city. So you can also phone into, say you were doing a smaller town, and you can phone and ask what the mill rate is for that area. So a mill rate is basically how they calculate tax assessed values and things like that. So usually if you're looking at a property, you're okay to ask for a property assessment or a property tax statement from the seller and have them provide that so that you can see what the mill rate is and see what the assessed value is.
So it's wonderful to know that for Red Deer, you can get those assessed values, because that's what the town of Red Deer, the city of Red Deer, offers on their city website. And as Andrea said, it depends on the town or the city. They get to run their city show the way they want it. Some do that and some don't, but I think all cities and towns have websites and tax departments, and so you can ask that question. Is the tax assessment available for free somewhere on your site? And they'll tell you. Doug, how much would it cost to repair a condo that had a water damage, moldy ceiling, and needed new plumbing? Danny says. Now, Danny, Doug's a carpenter, not a plumber. Of course, he does have all of that construction experience, so I'm pretty sure.
Budget $1 million. Yeah.
Oh, it depends.
Yeah, budget $1 million and then work your way down. It's there's no way you can give a number to it. It's how big is it? How much mold is there? How much has to be taken out?
One room, all rooms, square footage, high rise, low rise.
It's
Honest Door is a website. If you search the website Honest Door, they have, I think it's probably tax assessment estimates. So there, Danny, is another avenue for you. Go to Honest Door, plug in a map, and plug in an address, and you can get an assessment. Crystal, who's from Red Deer or buys in Red Deer, says she loves that interactive map. Oh, it also shows you the secondary suites and a whole bunch of other stuff. Yeah. Yes. I think a general comment here would be that now that every city and town has a website, now that websites are so much more sophisticated, now that there are programmers who have full-time jobs with cities and towns, what you can get on a municipal website has just ratcheted up to, there's unbelievable amounts of information. It can be different from each one, but if you're looking to buy in any particular town or city, I would go firstly to their website, get to know it really, really well, and you'll get a ton of information you didn't know you could get.
The only cautionary thing about city assessments is make sure that the assessment is up to date and not outdated, and all of a sudden you buy it and it's revalued at 3 times what the old assessment was.
Yes.
You know.
That's a good point, Doug. City tax assessments are not necessarily reflective of the market value of the property. Yeah. They can be up, they can be down. So that's just a bare place to start. I wouldn't go making my buying decisions just on the city tax assessed value, for sure. And with that, folks, we've come to the end of this absolutely fascinating session on AFS for sellers. So, Andrea, thank you very much for showing up, giving us the benefit of your wonderful smile and your information. Doug from Digby, what a guy you are. Yours is a great story on how you can be so creative with so many different numbers. And Donna, thank you very much for putting up that townhouse example on our end. That was really good. All right. We'll sign off now. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for showing up, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.